As life in America grows more complex and government becomes more intrusive, a growing number of people are forming sovereign living communities. These groups develop lives together without government services or commercial utilities. They provide for their own food, safe water, electricity, and defense. Communities practicing sovereign living set up their own systems for healthcare and education. Proponents say sovereign living communities provide a means of living without supporting what they claim is a corrupt government system. Detractors claim the movement will not provide for the basic needs of the community. A new show called Sovereign Living follows a family as they transition into a sovereign life. The series is centered around John and Catherine Bush, political activists who dropped their political activities for life on the farm. The show was created by John Bush and so far has raised nearly $5,000 on the donation site Indiegogo.com. John Bush is our guest today on the show, and he's here to talk to us about the sovereign living movement, his new reality series, and the people fighting against the trend. Welcome to the show, John.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me.
John, what's behind the current rise in people practicing self-sufficiency?
Well, I think there's a lot behind it. Primarily, people are becoming fed up with centralized institutions, with the government especially, and they're beginning to see that the emperor wears no clothes, and depending on this institution of government to solve all of life's ills has turned out to be quite an empty promise. So I think people are recognizing that, and people are also just realizing that the best way to live life is a natural, decentralized, simple way. So we're excited that many people are embracing this culture of sovereign living.
Now, John, you've used the phrase tyrannical in reference to the current system that we live in as Americans. Why do you find it so?
Well, there's a lot of oppression and top-down coercion going on. The system itself is based on coercion. The state's the only entity that has the ability to force people to do things against their will. So when you couple a system like that with some evil actors, it's only a matter of time before these evil actors use this institution to further their own goals at the expense of everyone else. You know, you got the National Security Agency spying program that's been leaked recently. You got the Department of Homeland Security labeling peaceful patriots as potential domestic terrorists. The police state is growing at an immense rate. The federalization and militarization of local police forces. I think if people think it's not going to affect them and they shouldn't have to worry about it, they need to think twice, because even if you're Joe, good citizen, you know, you may in fact find a boot crushing your face from a simple traffic stop. So I think it's important for everyone to get involved, because there is a lot of tyranny around here in the United States of America.
John, in the sovereign living community that you advocate, you often talk about not having a structured police force. How could crime be resolved without police?
First of all, unfortunately, there's a lot of criminals that fill the ranks of police forces, and more often than not, it's these criminals that do most of the harm because they have the authority that comes along with being a police officer. People aren't able to fight back, and if they resist, they often find themselves in even more trouble than they would have been had they not resisted. But I think there's plenty of alternatives that are already in place. And this isn't a pie-in-the-sky theory. You already have private security that polices particular neighborhoods. On top of that, you have community watch groups, neighborhood watch. So we're strong proponents of people self-organizing and either utilizing market functions like private defense agency, or just organizing some sort of Liberty Bell telephone network and messaging and alert system and getting all their neighbors on the same page. And, you know, I really have a strong feeling that even if there were to be morning, afternoon, and evening walks where a couple or a family walks the neighborhood, I think that would dramatically reduce crime more than increasing police budgets. So unfortunately, there seems to be more harm than good coming out of municipal police departments these days, especially in large cities like Chicago. And I think if people were to take it upon themselves to protect their families and their communities, find a lot more peace in this world.
Now, John, if there's a community defense program in this sovereign community that you advocate, could there eventually be vigilanteism and people acting on their own, developing into gangs, if you will? How would you prevent that type of activity?
Mm-hmm. Well, the status quo already has gangs and vigilanteism and organized criminal syndicates. The difference is in a genuinely free society, there isn't one entity that's able to be a monopoly criminal syndicate. And if anybody tries to resist them, again, they have that air of legitimacy that comes with being a public official or a law enforcement officer, to where if you try to fight back, you end up getting a felony or you get killed. It's very possible that vigilanteism would take place, or these criminal private defense agencies could turn into large criminal syndicates. But the beauty of it is we're advocating voluntary participation. So the minute a private defense agency is no longer in an individual's best interest, they can withdraw their consent, they can withdraw their financial support, and these agencies will find that it's much more difficult for them to continue to thrive and exist whenever people are no longer funding them or participating. Likewise, in a genuinely free society, in a sovereign society, people would be more able to defend themselves. For example, here in Texas, everyone thinks it's a big cowboy Second Amendment bastion, but it's actually illegal to open carry a firearm. In a genuinely free society, in the sovereign community I would like to exist in, people would be able to openly display their firearms, which most people are well aware, thanks to the great work by John Lott, More Guns, Less Crime, that an armed society is a polite society. So that's a great question. It's possible that criminal syndicates would arise in the absence of this municipal police department status quo that we have. But I'm willing to risk it, and I'm willing to venture to guess that absent this monopoly, that, again, if you resist the current criminal syndicate, which is the state, the way I see it, you could be shot or killed or arrested with a felony. Whereas if you resist a private agency, people would see it as a just action and you simply defending yourself and your family. I think there's a big difference there. And again, like I said, I'm willing to give it a try. It's an experiment, but I think the status quo is no longer serving the best interest of the people.
Now, John, let's talk about the self-sustaining communities and general needs. Electricity, for example. Technology has arisen to the point where solar panels and hydroelectric power is actually in the grasp of average people. How would you utilize these technologies in your self-sustaining community?
Sure. We're encouraging people to, take slow steps towards becoming more self-sufficient. I don't know that we'll ever be 100% self-sufficient. We'll always need to rely on others in order to fulfill our wants and needs. But I think if we take slow steps, you don't have to completely uncouple from the power supply, but the centralized power systems, municipal energy, is very vulnerable, whether it's just bureaucratic snafus, whether it's a natural disaster, or whether it's a lack of resources at the city level. It's possible for the power to go down. The power regularly goes down. So we're beginning to explore solar energy. It's something we visit in Sovereign Living the Show, episode 1. And one thing we want to do before the end of the year, or at least maybe in January, February, is get a few solar panels and run our refrigerator and our freezer on those. So in the event of some sort of power down, we'll still be able to maintain a large supply of food and have our slaughtered chickens in the freezers. So a good first step, I think, would be for people to check out solar panels. It could be expensive to power your whole house. Just pop a couple solar panels up and supply power to some of the essentials, again, like your refrigerator or a freezer, so you can continue to store food in the event of a power down.
John, let's play this trailer, but before we do, tell our viewers what to expect.
Yeah, essentially, Sovereign Living the Show is a 12-episode reality-based educational program. It follows my family, the Blush family. It's Catherine Bleish and I and our 2 children, in our quest to become self-sufficient and lead a voluntary and natural life. And it explores the ins and outs and ups and downs of one family's struggle to find freedom and self-sufficiency in an unfree world that's dependent on centralized institutions. So we think people will be educated, entertained, and inspired by the show. And we have a little sizzle reel that we've put together that gives an excellent preview of what the show is all about and what some of our goals are this year on the Blush family farm.
All right, let's take a look at the trailer.
Okay. A rule is to break. A child's guide to anarchy. Don't look like everybody else. Be you. When someone says work, you say, why? I've always been a bit of a rebel and a bit of an anti-authoritarian type.
A few years ago, I was really involved in political activism.
My name's John.
I'm Catherine.
And we're the Blush family.
I don't like rock and roll no more, not sure that I ever did.
This is the Blush Family Farm, a 2.4-acre farmstead in southeast Travis County, Texas. Here, we're trying to lead by example and live in a manner that's consistent with the ideal society that we envision. Sovereign living is the idea that people ought to take responsibility for providing for themselves, their family, and their community, from the provision of food, the provision of health care, to the provision of community defense.
If you can depend on yourself and your community, but no large institutions, then you're living a sovereign lifestyle.
For our second child, we are going to be doing a home birth that's hopefully 100% natural. We are really excited about our midwife, Mary Michael Potter.
The human body really is capable of doing a lot of these things, whether it's healing disease or birthing a child.
Being a grassroots operation, we are doing everything we can to learn from experts and learn from others that are more advanced than we are. And so we're gonna go travel around the country, we're gonna visit other farms, we're gonna visit other people that are engaging in self-sufficiency, food production, natural living, peaceful lifestyles.
Those are our worm bins.
99% of the time, it's not mud.
They don't call it a John for nothing. We're getting serious this year on the Blush Family Farm. 50% food self-sufficiency is our goal. We're gonna grow most of it. We're also gonna trade with local farms.
We're in the process of building a larger garden off on the side of our property with 17 mound kugel beds.
One of our goals is to build a greenhouse, and in the greenhouse have a few different aquaponics systems. We also want to increase our water storage. Right now we have a 275-gallon system comprised of 5 55-gallon drums. We want to up that to 2,000 gallons, maybe get a water tank in the back. We have 60 chickens now. We're looking to up that to 200 chickens. We want to bring on ducks. We want to do turkeys, pigs potentially. We're also exploring reducing our dependency on the central energy system by 50%, and we're going to do that by reducing our energy use by 25% and relying on alternative energy for 25%. And this is just the beginning. Eventually we want to go 100% off the grid.
I've been cheating myself for another man's fantasy. Pick up my plant back, garden out back. Sunshine will do me some good. Think I'll take a shot at making rock and roll be what it could.
Welcome to Sovereign Living.
Looks like a great show. John, tell us a little bit more about the program and what you hope the viewer to take away from it.
Well, we hope to demonstrate that anybody can make practical steps to becoming self-sufficient and leading a more voluntary and natural life. And we're kind of putting ourselves out there and really personal stuff we get into. For example, episode 3 is all about our natural home birth of our second child. Episode 2 deals with some neighbor problems and some disputes we're dealing with our neighbors across the street, and how we're going to deal with those problems without relying on the police. Episode 1 is all about self-sufficiency. So we really hope to have a demonstrative example of how people can take these practical steps. And we're hoping that people participate by donating at sovereignliving.tv. We're doing an Indiegogo campaign where people can get some exciting perks in exchange for their donation. You also have an opportunity to check out a sneak peek of episodes 2 and 3. Episode 1 has now been released to the public. And the website is sovereignliving.tv for people to explore that. The reviews are awesome. Everyone agrees it's educational, entertaining, and inspirational all at the same time.
All right, John, now let's talk about the nuts and bolts of a self-sustaining community. I want to ask you about how would an economy function? How would the commerce flow in such a community?
Well, it would operate very similar to how things take place, except there wouldn't be a centralized, arbitrary dictator that sets interest rates or that has the ability to expand the money supply based on helping their buddies out and giving opening up the discount window for bailouts for their friends. So essentially, people would just engage in mutually beneficial voluntary exchanges. We recommend that people limit their use of the Federal Reserve note because, of course, the Federal Reserve is losing value at a very rapid rate. But also because every time you use a Federal Reserve note, you're in turn empowering an institution that creates money out of thin air, that finances big government programs, and that finances foreign wars of aggression. So we like to use silver dimes as a medium of exchange. We have a chicken farm here. I don't know if you can hear the rooster in the background, but we like to trade a dozen eggs for a silver dime. We're bringing back a dozen. We're also really into Bitcoin, the crypto digital currency. It's so easy to transfer this currency to anyone in exchange for goods and services. Much easier than using a credit card or a bank or even using Federal Reserve notes. And we also are really big fans of barter. Sometimes barter doesn't work because there's not a matchup on wants and needs. But if you have someone that's willing to do a haircut or clean your house, for example, or get in help out with the plumbing in exchange for eggs or a slaughtered chicken, or if you're a webmaster in exchange for your webmaster skills, I think that's one of the best ways to go about engaging in trade. You don't have to worry about any medium of exchange. There's no barriers to entry. You don't have to purchase Bitcoin or silver to do so. You just have a one-on-one simple transaction. So in a sovereign community, things would take place much like they do now, except there wouldn't be an entity leeching wealth from everyone and transferring it to their friends to expand.
Well, John, let's talk about
programs.
that, because how would these communities, or do these communities, threaten established corporations and threaten the government structure?
Well, if, as I would hope, if more people choose not to participate in these centralized institutions, they would lose profit, they would lose legitimacy, and hopefully lose authority. But the way I see it, this sovereign lifestyle isn't for everyone. Some people are uncomfortable with the personal responsibility that comes along with seeking a genuinely free life and building a genuinely free society. So there will still be countless millions. The large majority of people will still continue to operate in the same fashion, dependent on grocery stores and centralized health care, and dependent on the government to provide security and justice. But I think there's more and more people that are seeing through the harm that comes along with depending on those institutions for everything. So I think that it would actually put some cracks in the facade of legitimacy in the state, and many large corporations would see their bottom line start to hurt if more people depended on, rather than the grocery store, growing their own food or local farms, for example.
Now, John, are there any opponents of sovereign communities, and what methods would they use to try to slow the rise of these communities?
Well, our goal is total freedom, and in order to have 100% freedom, we shouldn't be forced to participate in institutions that we find antithetical to our values. So as we go further in this journey towards genuine sovereign living, there's likely going to be some tension between people choosing to participate in this lifestyle and the state. For example, in order to find genuine sovereignty, the individual is the highest authority. There is no state that holds authority over his life or his property. People are going to have to start opting out of these centralized coercive institutions like the income tax, for example, or the property tax. And I imagine there'll be immense tension at that point. We're trying to expand alternative education and encourage their parents to pull their children out of public schools and consider homeschooling or unschooling. And I imagine we'll find some resistance from teachers' unions and bureaucrats in that regard. But, we're nothing more than peaceful people that want to be left alone and do our own thing in our own peaceful way. So I would hope that nobody would be opposed to us opting out of the central institutions and living life on our own. But there's detractors out there, so we need to come up with creative ways to peacefully resist any oppression that might fall upon us.
Now, John, last question. What was the inspiration to develop these self-sustaining communities and to create a reality show based around it?
Well, my personal inspiration for becoming more sovereign and living a more natural life came from my fiancée, Catherine Bleich. Both of us were political activists for about half a decade, and, we really gave it our all, and 60-hour weeks fighting at the local and state level, and we managed to pull off a few legislative and political victories, but every step we took forward at the same time, the state had already expanded and grown immensely. And we finally were fed up with it, and we decided the best way to change the world is to take a good hard look in the mirror and change the way that we live. And the purpose of the reality show Sovereign Living is to demonstrate that it's doable and to give a real-world example of one family's struggle to become self-sufficient. Not everyone's going to be as dedicated to genuine 100% sovereign living as we are, but I think there's something that everybody could gain from this, no matter how into it they are. We should all take small steps in our lives to become less dependent on these centralized institutions, and Sovereign Living the show hopes to demonstrate that in a fun, inspirational way.
All right, that was John Bush. He's the co-star and executive producer of the new reality show Sovereign Living. We'll be right back with more on WHDT World News. We got the rest of today's headlines. We've also got some news from Hollywood and a full report on the weather coming up We'll be right back.